This section will be discussing an introduction to ethics and a brief overview of ethics in research practices and why it's so important to maintain ethical considerations when conducting research. So first, what are ethics? So there are a set of rules and guidelines that govern the expectations of our own and others' behaviors when conducting research. So it guides us on how scientific research should be conducted. It's an agreement made by different industries, by the APA, by any scientific research, medical science, et cetera, that agrees that we will adhere to these set of ethical guidelines as best practices. And so when you go through something like the IRB committee or a review, they'll be looking for these ethical standards so that when you are published in a peer-reviewed journal, it's understood that you have followed these ethical guidelines. Most of them, they're not laws, but they're ethical considerations. They're things that if you do not follow them, that this would be brought up when you go through a peer review or when you submit your research to a committee, that you want to make sure that you're following these ethical guidelines. So again, they're conducting the standard for scientific research and for our responsibility. You're doing research on human subjects. And so as a researcher, we have an ethical responsibility to protect people and to make sure that we're conducting research in a way that is healthy and beneficial and supportive to the people who are involved in our research. So we want to make sure that when we involve people in our study, that we're being clear about what is expected, about how they're going to be treated, and that there are options for their participation in the research. And so when as I said, you go through and you've done your study, the institutional review board will go through and say, yes, you have gone out of your way and you've considered these ethical guidelines to protect the rights, the dignity, the welfare of the people that are participating in your study, that there was no mistreatment, that there was you adhered to the dignity and human rights in your research. So these rules, these guidelines, and we'll go into them, but to know why they exist, that it's setting the standard for the way that researchers treat humans and human subjects of all ages. So why are they important? So again, they promote the goal of research, better understanding humanity, better understanding relationships and human interactions, and advancing the field of science. And so these ethics promote a way of doing this, that our goal is to understand people in a way that where they're respected, that we're able to accomplish our goals and promote the goals of having publishable research that we can share to advance the field. They create trust. So it's a universal agreement, particularly on researchers, that this is something that will happen with it when you participate in a study, that you will be safe, that you won't be put in danger, that you have a right to refuse if you feel uncomfortable. We're protecting the dignity and the rights, the welfare of these research participants. And it holds the researchers accountable and answerable for your actions. So let's say that you were conducting research on cyberbullying, and it would be unethical for you to then attempt to, as part of the research, cyberbully your participants. That would not be maintaining their dignity, their rights, their welfare, their mental well-being. And so you would receive some feedback from the IRB committee, from any peer-reviewed journal, that that's not something that would fall within ethical standards. So they also promote our social and moral values, and they demonstrate the care in research, that we know that if there is a researcher who's maintaining ethics, that they're following the guidelines, that you can trust the worth and the reliability of the research, that if they're not cutting corners with ethical behaviors as a means to an end to obtain the research, that the chances are that the rest of the study is also given the same care and attention. And so some of why these ethics have come up is because there has been research done in history that has not been ethical. You may have heard about research done on human subjects in Nazi Germany. And clearly ethics was not followed there in terms of dignity, rights, and welfare of research participants. some of where this also came from, if you're familiar with Stanley Milgram's obedience to authority, in which case they were encouraging people to harm others. Now, they weren't actually, those respondents were not actually harming other people, but there was some psychological damage to them about the anxiety of having to hurt other people. And so as a result of participating in Milgram's experiment, while the results were interesting and we still talk about them today, mostly we refer to that as an example of a study that did not maintain the dignity, the rights, the welfare, the overall well-being of the participants who were asked to do things that they were not comfortable doing. That the study was designed to see how much you could push somebody to maintain their feelings of comfort in harming somebody else. So these fundamental ethical principles are, so respect for the person, a very important one, that everybody is treated with respect, that they have the right to make their own decisions. So that when you recruit somebody to participate in your study, that you're upfront, you're giving them consent, they are either a volunteer or that they have a choice to participate in your research. So you want to make sure that they have the capacity to decide if something is considered a violation of basic human rights. And this is especially important when we think about what we would consider vulnerable research participants, such as children, pregnant women, prisoners, and persons with mental disabilities. And so it's like if you were to say, conduct a research on a minor without getting consent from a parent or from a guardian, it would be taking advantage of a situation that they would not be capable of making a responsible decision. Persons with mental disabilities, they don't understand, they may not have the ability to say yes or no, they may not understand. You're not being clear about the repercussions of the study if they're not capable of understanding. Another example could be you're recruiting participants and there could be a language barrier and you have not provided a translation of the consent form and what the study is. And so you're asking a person to agree to participate in the study without giving them the information that they can make a decision as to whether or not they want to participate in the study. So it is so important to be upfront about the study and what will be happening to them. Now, as we talk about research further in the semester, we will talk about the fact that in order to reduce biases in sampling, that we may not be able to be completely upfront in terms of what it is that we're studying, because then you get the observation bias and other things that we'll talk about. But where this comes into play is that you are not doing anything that will harm other people. So an example that I can give is I was performing a study for a cognitive psychology project, and part of it was to be able to assess spatial recognition. And what this meant was putting them in a dark room in a chair that could tilt to the side, stay straight, and tilt to the right. And then they had to, on a joystick, move it's called the rod and frame test, but a rod that could align within a frame. And so it was how well they could align the rod so it was straight up when they were looking at different angles. However, because it was a dark room and their bodies were physically moving, I had to be very, very upfront that you're going to be in the dark, that the chair will be testing your spatial orientation, because if there was somebody that had a phobia of the dark, if there was somebody that did not feel comfortable or had a reason why spatial changes could be disruptive to them, that would not be looking out for their well-being. So that's an example of a study where ethical considerations had to be upfront and let them know clearly what situation they were agreeing to be part of. So then beneficents. Okay, so are we protecting them? Are we protecting them from the physical and psychological harm? We're ensuring their privacy, their dignity, their autonomy. So we're, again, reinforcing that maximizing the benefits to minimize possible harm to the respondents. And then justice, making sure that everybody is treated fairly and equally, that there's no differential treatment based on whether it be either gender, social demographics, culture, that we are protecting vulnerable groups, that you are treating, say, perhaps a vulnerable group with the same dignity and ethical considerations that you would treat others. So these are the fundamental ethical principles that we look at when conducting scientific research. Now, when this is done, what happens is a lot of times the research will go through the internal review board. And so it's commonly referred to as the IRB committee. This is something that you'll hear throughout different projects and research projects. And when you do your capstone, something that you may end up submitting your research to. So this committee reviews proposals, they monitor, they approve them, anything that involves human subjects. So you submit, they review. And so when you are submitting to a peer-reviewed journal, you do want to specify that, yes, this research that you're doing was approved by the IRB. And Norfolk State, they have their own IRB form that you can find by clicking the link found in the slides. So most universities do have them to support the research done within the school's academic community. So in summary, the important things to remember for ethics, and we will deep dive into these in the next couple of weeks, but you want to minimize the risk of harm. We don't want to engage in research that harms people. You know, if you want to say, you want to judge reaction time, you're not going to judge reaction time by pushing people in front of cars, right? That might be a way of obtaining information about human reaction time, but that is not minimizing the risk involved. Okay, we're not minimizing the risk of harm there. So we do not want to look at studies that would do something like that. We always obtain informed consent, either by the person who is participating or by a guardian or somebody that has the capabilities to understand and comprehend the research being performed and to give permission for that. We want to protect autonomy, we want to protect confidentiality. So we don't share the results publicly, we share summaries. We want to avoid any misleading practices. While there are times that you want to protect the fact that that there is some observation bias, and we'll talk about this later, but for the most part, we do try to maintain ethical considerations about misleading practices. We always allow the right to withdraw if somebody's ever in a situation while doing your research they don't feel comfortable. You want to give them the right to withdraw and make it clear that they have that right to withdraw. You are also, when you are maintaining the ethical standards, you're preserving the integrity of the research and you're maintaining your own professional behavior and integrity. So these are all things that provide an overview of the deep dives that we'll be doing when it comes to ethics, and I encourage you to look through your text and some of the ethical challenges that we might face and how to get around those, because by the end of the semester, as you go to design your study, and as you design research through your different classes in this program, ethics will be a major part of that, because you always want to make sure that any study that you design is following ethical considerations, because it reflects upon your research, the university, and the strategies and the approaches that you take to maintaining human dignity and the respect that we as researchers have for the individuals who take the time and effort to be part of our research that becomes incredibly valuable. Have any questions about ethics? Feel free to reach out. We will be deep diving into them in the beginning few weeks of this class. So you'll be learning a lot about ethics over the next few weeks.